She was the pack's dirty little secret. Born with snow-white hair and ruby eyes, Iris was branded a curse, an Omega destined to serve the cruel wolves who tormented her. She fell asleep in a freezing cellar, praying for the end. But when she opened her eyes, she wasn't on the cold floor. She was drowning in silk sheets, surrounded by the scent of pine and raw power, staring into the face of the most feared man in the continent. The Alpha King didn't just save her, he claimed her. But in a world built on bloodlines and betrayal, being the king's mate puts a target on her back that's bigger than the one she was born with. This is the story of how the unwanted Albino Omega brought an empire to its knees. The first thing Iris registered was the warmth. It was an alien sensation. For 22 years, Iris had known only the bone-deep chill of the drafty cellar beneath the packhouse kitchen. Cold was her constant companion, a reminder of her station, the Albino Omega, the mistake, the curse of the Silver Moon pack. But this warmth was suffocatingly luxurious. It smelled of cedar wood, rain, and something darker, like ozone before a lightning strike. Iris bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her vision, always blurry due to her sensitive, pigment-lacking eyes, swam in the low light. She wasn't on her threadbare mattress. She was in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, wrapped in sheets that felt like liquid water against her scarred skin. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the comfort. Where was she? She scrambled backward, her pale hands clutching the duvet. She looked down at herself. The oversized, grease-stained grey shirt she usually wore was gone. In its place was a silk shirt, buttoned wrong, clearly belonging to a man much larger than her. "You're awake." The voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards and straight into her spine. Iris flinched, squinting toward the corner of the room. A shadow detached itself from the wall. As he stepped into the sliver of moonlight cutting through the heavy curtains, Iris stopped breathing. It was Kieran. Not just an alpha. The Alpha King. The ruler of all 5 territories. The man whose name was used to frighten pups into behaving. He was massive, standing well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his black dress shirt. His dark hair was disheveled, and his eyes, gold with flecks of obsidian, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please," Iris whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. She instinctively bared her neck, a submissive gesture drilled into her since childhood. "I didn't mean to. I don't know how I got here. Please don't kill me." Kieran didn't move. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Kill you?" he repeated, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "You think I brought you here to kill you?" "I'm forbidden," Iris stammered, trembling so hard the bed frame shook. "I'm the albino. I'm bad luck. Alpha Gavin said if I ever left the cellar during a royal visit, I would be skinned." A low growl ripped from Kieran's chest, a sound so primal it made the glass of water on the nightstand ripple. Iris squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. She knew how this worked. High-ranking wolves hated looking at her. Her white hair, her pale skin, her red eyes. It offended their obsession with perfection. But the blow never came. Instead, the mattress dipped. Kieran sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a careful distance. "Gavin," Kieran said, the name dripping with venom, "will never touch you again. No one will." Iris dared to open one eye. The Alpha King looked furious, but the rage didn't seem directed at her. It was directed for her. "Why?" she breathed. Kieran turned to look at her fully. His gaze dropped to the mark on her neck, a fresh, angry bite mark that was slowly healing. Iris's hand flew to the spot. She gasped. A mating mark. "Because," Kieran said, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that made her wolf whine in confusion, "I don't make a habit of killing my own mate." The world tilted on its axis. Iris felt the blood drain from her face. Mate? It was impossible. She was a genetic defect, a servant. "You're mistaken," she whispered, terrified of correcting a king, but more terrified of the hope blooming in her chest. "It's a trick. Beatrice, she must have drugged me. Or Gavin is playing a game." "Beatrice?" Kieran asked sharply. "The Beta's daughter," Iris said. She likes to play pranks." Kieran stood up abruptly, the predatory grace of his movement making Iris flinch again. He walked to the window, staring out at the snowy landscape of the Silver Moon territory. "Get dressed, Iris," he commanded, though his tone was softer than before. He pointed to a pile of clothes on a chair, expensive clothes. "We have a meeting in the main hall. It seems the Silver Moon Pack has some explaining to do regarding their treatment of their queen." Iris stared at his back. Queen? She couldn't even get extra scraps of meat from the kitchen. And he was calling her queen? She remembered fragments of last night now. The mating ball. She had been ordered to clean the mud from the guests' boots in the foyer. She remembered Beatrice kicking a bucket of dirty water over her. She remembered running into the woods, freezing, crying, wishing the snow would just swallow her whole. She remembered strong arms lifting her up. She had thought it was the angel of death. Turns out it was the king. Walking into the pack house, main hall, usually meant Iris was about to be punished. Today, however, felt like walking into a different dimension. Kieran walked a step ahead of her, his large frame acting as a shield. Iris kept her head down, her white hair falling like a curtain around her face to hide her red eyes. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and jeans that Kieran had provided, clothes that fit perfectly, unlike the rags she was used to. The hall was packed. Every high-ranking member of the Silver Moon Pack was there. The air was thick with the scent of fear and confusion. When Kieran entered, the room went silent. "Alpha King," Alpha Gavin bowed low. Gavin was a handsome man in a superficial way, with blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his cruel blue eyes. Beside him stood Beatrice, the beta female, who had made Iris's life a living hell since kindergarten. Gavin straightened up, his eyes scanning the room. When his gaze landed on Iris standing behind the king, his expression curdled. "My king," Gavin said, his voice smooth. "I see you found the stray. My apologies. The creature is mentally unstable. We keep her in the cellar for her own safety. I hope she didn't disturb your rest. I will have her disciplined immediately." Gavin took a step forward, reaching for Iris's arm. Snap! Before Gavin's fingers could graze Iris's sweater, Kieran moved. It was a blur of motion. 1 second Gavin was reaching out. The next, he was pinned against the stone fireplace, Kieran's hand wrapped around his throat, lifting the alpha off the ground. "Touch her!" Kieran snarled, his eyes bleeding into full wolf black. "And I will rip your arm from its socket and feed it to you." Gasps echoed through the hall. Beatrice shrieked, covering her mouth. Kieran dropped Gavin. The alpha crumbled to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. "Stray?" Kieran asked, turning to face the trembling pack. "Creature? Is that how you speak of your superiors?" "She is an Omega," Beatrice blurted out, unable to help herself. "She's a defect. Look at her eyes. She's a curse, Your Majesty. She has no wolf. She's barely human." Kieran turned his gaze to Beatrice. The woman withered under the weight of his stare. "Iris," Kieran said calmly. "Come here." Iris froze. Her legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to the cellar. But the pull of the bond, the strange, warm tether connecting her to Kieran, tugged her forward. She walked to his side, trembling. Kieran placed a heavy, possessive hand on the nape of her neck. The sparks that flew between them were visible, a crackle of gold, energy that made the pack members gasp. "This," Kieran announced, his voice booming like thunder, "is not a stray. This is my true mate, and as of last night, she is the queen of the 7 territories." Dead silence. Then Gavin, rubbing his bruised throat, laughed. It was a nervous, desperate sound. A joke, surely. The moon goddess would not pair the Alpha King with that. "She is an albino, sire, a genetic dead end." "Careful, Gavin," Kieran warned. "I speak only out of concern for your bloodline," Gavin pressed, sensing he was losing control of the narrative. "She is barren, weak. She can't shift. If you mate with her, you weaken the entire kingdom." Iris shrank into herself. Gavin was right. She had never shifted. She was weak. She was a burden. She tried to pull away from Kieran, shame burning her cheeks. "He's right," she whispered to Kieran. "Please let me go. I don't want to ruin you." Kieran looked down at her, and for a moment the room disappeared. He saw the pain in her eyes, years of conditioning that told her she was worthless. "You don't know what you are, do you?" Kieran asked softly. He turned back to the crowd. "You call her albino as if it is a defect. You fools." Kieran paced the room. Centuries ago, before the packs were divided, the royal bloodline didn't carry the gene for black fur or brown. The original alpha bloodline, the pure line, was white, white as snow. Red eyes to see in the dark where others were blind. He stopped in front of Beatrice, who was shaking. "She isn't a defect," Kieran declared. "She is a throwback to the primal line. She has more royal blood in her little finger than this entire pack combined. And the reason she hasn't shifted," he looked at Gavin with disgust, "is because she has been starved and abused to the point where her wolf went dormant to survive." The revelation hung in the air. Iris stared at her hands. "Royal blood?" "Pack Alpha, Gavin," Kieran said, his voice deadly calm. "You have enslaved a royal. Under the old laws, the punishment is death." Gavin's face went pale. "You can't! The council—" "I am the council!" Kieran roared. "Wait!" Beatrice screamed. "She bewitched him. It's a spell. My grandmother talked about witches who used potions to mimic the mate bond. Look at her. She's using dark magic." It was a desperate, stupid lie. But in a room full of superstitious wolves who hated Iris, it was a spark in a powder keg. Murmurs broke out. "She does mix herbs in the kitchen," one cook whispered. "Her eyes are demon eyes," another muttered. Kieran bared his teeth, ready to slaughter them all, but Iris put a hand on his chest. The contact calmed him instantly. "No," Iris said, finding her voice. She stepped out from behind Kieran. "I am not a witch, and I am tired of being afraid." She looked at Gavin, then Beatrice. "If you claim I am false, then test me. I invoke the trial of the moon." The room gasped again. The trial of the moon was an ancient, brutal gauntlet. If a wolf survived, the goddess favored them. If they died, they were false. "Iris, no," Kieran hissed, grabbing her arm. "You are too weak. You won't survive the first round." Iris looked up at him, her ruby eyes shining with a sudden, strange clarity. "If I am your mate, Kieran, I am not weak. I need to know. And they need to see." Kieran looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel spine beneath the fragile frame. He hated it, but he respected it. "Very well," Kieran said, his voice cold. "The trial begins at sunset. But know this, Gavin. If she gets a single scratch that isn't part of the trial, I will burn this territory to the ground." The news spread like wildfire. The cursed Omega was challenging the pack hierarchy through the trial of the moon. By sunset, the entire pack had gathered at the edge of the Shadow Woods, a dense, dangerous section of the forest used for execution runs. The snow was falling heavily, turning the world into a blur of white and grey. Iris stood at the starting line, wearing light leather armor Kieran had insisted she wear. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying reality of what she had done. The trial consisted of 3 stages. The first was the hunt. She had to navigate the woods and retrieve the silver flag from the Alpha's peak before sunrise, all while being hunted by the pack's elite warriors. Usually, the runner was allowed a head start. 10 minutes, Gavin sneered, standing with his 3 best enforcers, big, hulking wolves who looked at Iris like she was a snack. "Run, little rabbit." Kieran stood on the viewing platform, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He was forbidden from interfering by ancient law. If he stepped in, Iris would be declared false and executed by the pack laws he was sworn to uphold. "Go," Kieran mind-linked her. It was the first time he had used the telepathic bond. His voice in her head was clear and grounding. "Trust your instincts, Iris. You are a primal." Iris turned and sprinted into the trees. She wasn't fast. Her human legs sank into the snow. Her lungs burned. But she knew these woods better than anyone. While the warriors trained in the gym, Iris had spent years gathering herbs in these forests to treat her own wounds. She knew where the ground was unstable, where the bear dens were, where the scent-masking river weed grew. She ran for 5 minutes before she heard the howls. They were coming. Iris dove into a ravine, sliding down the icy mud. She grabbed a handful of pungent wild mint and crushed it over her clothes to mask her scent. Above her, heavy paws thudded against the earth. "Find her!" Gavin's voice echoed in his wolf form. "Tear her apart! Make it look like an accident!" Iris pressed herself into a crevice between 2 rocks. Her heart hammered against the stone. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what Kieran had said. Primal. Suddenly, a massive grey wolf, one of the enforcers, skidded to a halt above her. He sniffed the air. He looked down. Their eyes locked. The wolf snarled, drool dripping from his jaws. He lunged. Iris didn't think. She reacted. She didn't have claws, but she had a pocket full of defense powder she had made from dried chili peppers and ground glass, a desperate invention for when the drunk pack members cornered her in the kitchen. As the wolf descended, she threw the powder into his eyes. The wolf yelped, blinding and thrashing, crashing into the rocks. He lost his footing on the ice and tumbled down into the deeper ravine with a sickening crunch. 1 down, 2 to go. Iris scrambled up the other side. She needed to get to higher ground. As she ran, she felt a strange heat building in her belly. It wasn't the warmth of the bond. It was something ancient. Her vision began to shift. The blurry grey of the night sharpened. She could see the heat signatures of the squirrels in the trees. She could smell the sap in the pine needles. She was changing. She reached the base of Alpha's peak. The flag was there, fluttering in the wind. But standing between her and the flag was Beatrice. Beatrice hadn't shifted. She was holding a crossbow. "Cheating isn't allowed," Iris gasped, clutching a stitch in her side. "Who's going to tell?" Beatrice smirked. "You'll be dead. A tragic fall." Beatrice raised the bow. "Goodbye, freak." Twang. The bolt flew. Iris tried to dodge, but she was too slow. The arrow sliced through her shoulder, pinning her to the tree behind her. Iris screamed. The pain was blinding. "Pathetic," Beatrice laughed, reloading. "Kieran will forget you in a week. I'll make a much better queen." Beatrice aimed for the heart this time, but before she could pull the trigger, a low, vibrating growl emanated from Iris. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like a normal wolf. It sounded like a monster. Iris grabbed the arrow shaft protruding from her shoulder. With a wet squelch, she ripped it out. She didn't scream this time. She looked up, and her ruby eyes were glowing with a terrifying luminescence. The white hair on her arms began to lengthen. Her bones cracked and reshaped. Usually, a first shift takes hours and is agonizing. Iris shifted in seconds. Where the small, fragile girl had stood, there was now a wolf. But not just any wolf. She was massive, larger than the enforcers. Her fur was pure, blinding white. Her claws were like obsidian daggers. Beatrice dropped the crossbow, her face twisted in pure terror. "Primal," she whispered. Iris didn't attack. She simply opened her jaws and let out a roar that shook the snow from the trees, a sound that forced every wolf within 5 miles to drop to their knees in submission. Back at the viewing platform, Kieran smiled, his eyes glowing gold. "There she is." The silence in the snowy clearing was heavy, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the crackle of burning torches. The massive white wolf, Iris, stood over the shivering form of Beatrice. The beta female, who had spent a lifetime tormenting Iris, was now curled in a fetal position, sobbing into the mud, her crossbow forgotten. Iris snorted, a plume of steam escaping her snout. She didn't bite. She didn't kill. She simply turned her massive head, clamped her jaws around the silver flag planted in the frozen earth, and ripped it free. With a trot that shook the ground, she walked past the stunned enforcers and dropped the flag at Alpha Gavin's feet. Then, the snapping of bones began again. Shifting back was agonizing. It felt like being broken apart and stitched back together. Iris collapsed onto the snow, her human skin raw and steaming in the cold air, completely naked. Before the first snowflake could touch her skin, a heavy fur cloak enveloped her. Kieran was there. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, his face a mask of terrifying pride and simmering rage. "The first trial is concluded," Kieran announced, his voice carrying over the wind. "She has the flag. She survives." She is a monster," Gavin stammered, staring at the spot where the giant wolf had stood. "That was not a normal shift. That was a mutation." "It was a primal shift," Kieran corrected, pressing a kiss to Iris's sweaty forehead. "And you should be on your knees, thanking her for not ripping your throat out. The second trial begins tomorrow at noon. Until then, anyone who approaches the Queen dies." Back in the safety of the Alpha King's temporary quarters, a luxury cabin on the edge of the territory, Iris lay by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Her body ached, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel cold. A fire burned inside her veins. "Drink this," Kieran said, handing her a mug of hot broth. Iris took it, her hands trembling. I turned into a wolf, Kieran. A giant one." "My great-grandfather wrote about the primals," Kieran said, sitting on the rug beside her. He looked at her with reverence. "They were the guardians of the moon. They didn't just lead packs, they protected the balance of nature. That form. Iris, you are stronger than me." Iris looked into the dark liquid of the broth. Gavin called it a mutation. The pack looked terrified. "They are terrified because they have sinned against you," Kieran growled. "They realize now that the girl they starved and beat could snap them in half. They are afraid of retribution." "I don't want revenge," Iris whispered. "I just want to be safe." Kieran took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "You will be safe. But to be safe, we must finish the game. The second trial is the trial of truth. Usually, It is a test of lineage. They will try to rig it. How? The stone of ancestors, Kieran explained. It's a black obelisk in the town square. When a wolf touches it, the stone changes color to reveal their rank. Grey for Omega, blue for Beta, red for Alpha. For royals, it glows gold. Iris frowned. But everyone thinks I'm a defect. If it glows gold... Gavin will claim the machine is broken, Kieran predicted. But I have a plan. We aren't just going to show them your rank, Iris. We are going to show them your history. The next day, the town square was packed. The atmosphere was different now. There were no jeers, no thrown rotten vegetables. The pack watched Iris with wide, fearful eyes. The obelisk stood in the center, a towering slab of obsidian. Gavin stood on the podium, looking exhausted and frantic. He had spent the night plotting with Beatrice. They knew they were losing control. "The second trial!" Gavin bellowed, trying to regain his authority. "The Omega claims to be of royal blood. The stone does not lie. If she is a commoner or a defect, the stone will remain black, and she will be executed for impersonating royalty." Beatrice stood by the stone, smirking. She had paid the pack witch to place a dampening rune on the back of the stone. No matter how powerful Iris was, the stone would show nothing. "Step forward," Gavin commanded. Iris walked up the stone steps. She wore a simple white dress today, her silver hair braided like a crown. She didn't look at the ground anymore. She looked straight at Gavin. She reached out her hand. "Wait." Kieran's voice cut through the air. The king stepped forward. "Before she touches it, I wish to test the stone's accuracy. Gavin, why don't you demonstrate?" Gavin stiffened. "My king, my rank is known." "Humor me," Kieran said, his hand resting on the hilt of the ceremonial sword at his hip. Gavin gritted his teeth and placed his hand on the stone. It glowed a dull, muddy red. "Alpha, but a weak one." "Beatrice," Kieran commanded. Beatrice hesitated. She glanced at the back of the stone where the rune was hidden. If she touched it, the rune might trigger early. I am unworthy," she lied. "Touch it," Kieran roared. Beatrice flinched and slapped her hand on the stone. It flashed blue. "Working perfectly," Kieran noted dryly. He turned to Iris. "My queen." Iris stepped up. She saw the panic in Beatrice's eyes. She sensed the magic radiating from the back of the stone. Her new wolf instincts were sharp. She could smell the foul stench of the dampening spell. Instead of placing her palm on the front, Iris walked around the stone. "What is she doing?" Gavin shouted. "That's not the procedure." Iris reached the back. She saw the small clay rune stuck to the obsidian. With a sharp fingernail, she scraped it off and crushed it in her hand. Beatrice gasped. Iris placed both hands on the cold stone. For a second, nothing happened. The crowd murmured. Gavin opened his mouth to declare her a fraud. Then a crack appeared in the stone. Light didn't just glow, it exploded. A beam of pure, blinding gold shot up into the sky, piercing the grey clouds. The light was so intense that wolves in the front row had to shield their eyes. The hum of power shattered the windows of the nearby shops, but it didn't stop at gold. The light shifted, swirling into a prism of colours. White, the white royal. Images began to project from the stone, a rare phenomenon that hadn't happened in centuries. It was a hologram of memory stored in Iris's blood. The crowd watched in stunned silence as a scene unfolded in the air. A beautiful woman with white hair and red eyes, Iris's mother, holding a baby. She was running through the woods. A man stepped out of the shadows in the projection. He was younger, but the sneer was unmistakable. It was Gavin. "Please," the woman in the projection begged. "Take the territory. Just let me take my daughter and leave." I can't have loose ends, Seraphina, the projection Gavin said. The council thinks the white line ended years ago. If they find out you're alive, I lose my claim to this land. The projection Gavin lunged. He tore the woman's throat out. He looked at the crying baby, Iris, bundled in the snow. He raised a claw to kill her, then stopped. No, the younger Gavin muttered. Death is too easy. I'll keep you. I'll make you a servant. I'll make the heir to the throne scrub my floors. That is a better victory. The projection faded. The silence in the square was absolute. It was deafening. Iris took her hand off. The stone. She turned to face Gavin. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of pure, crystallized hatred. You killed them, she whispered, her voice amplified by the lingering magic. You knew who I was. You knew my parents. You murdered them to steal their land, and then you enslaved me to mock their memory. The pack turned to look at their alpha. The look in their eyes wasn't fear anymore. It was disgust. To kill a royal was treason. To kill a mother and enslave a child, that was a crime against the moon goddess herself. It's a trick, Gavin screamed, backing away. Witchcraft! She manipulated the stone. Seize him, Kieran commanded. But Gavin was desperate. He whistled sharp and loud. Suddenly, arrows flew from the rooftops. Not at Iris, at the crowd. Chaos erupted. Gavin's loyalists, a small group of corrupt enforcers, began attacking the confused pack members to create a diversion. Kill the king! Gavin shrieked. He is an imposter led by a witch! The square dissolved into anarchy. Kieran drew his sword, deflecting an arrow aimed at Iris's heart. Get to cover! He roared at her. I'm not leaving you! Iris yelled back. She felt the shift coming again, the bones shifting, the fur sprouting. She lunged at an enforcer who was charging Kieran from behind, transforming mid-air into the white wolf. She crushed the attacker into the pavement. The battle was short, but brutal. Gavin's loyalists were outnumbered. Within 10 minutes, the rebellion was squashed. But Gavin and Beatrice were gone. They had used the chaos to slip away into the tunnels beneath the pack house. Find them, Kieran ordered his royal guards. Tear this city apart. He turned to Iris, who had shifted back and was wrapping herself in a cloak provided by a stunned shopkeeper. Are you hurt? Kieran asked, checking her for wounds. No, Iris said, her eyes hard. But he got away. Not for long, Kieran promised. He has nowhere to go. All 5 territories will be hunting him now. That night, the mood in the pack house was a strange mix of celebration and tension. The truth was out. Iris was not just a queen by marriage. She was the rightful owner of the Silver Moon territory by blood. The pack members who had spat on her yesterday were now kneeling as she walked down the corridors, begging for forgiveness. Iris ignored them. She didn't want their groveling. She wanted justice. A feast was prepared in the Great Hall, a tradition that could not be broken even in times of war. It was the eve of the 3rd trial, though the trial seemed redundant now. Kieran sat at the head of the table, Iris at his right. The food was rich, the wine flowed, but neither of them ate. We need to secure the borders, Kieran told his beta, a loyal man named Vance. Gavin will try to flee to the Rogue Lands. My king, a servant girl approached, her head bowed low. She was trembling. She held a golden goblet on a tray, a peace offering, from the kitchen staff, to apologize to the queen. She offered the goblet to Iris. Iris looked at the girl. She recognized her. It was Sarah, a young Omega who had sometimes snuck Iris extra bread when Gavin wasn't looking. Thank you, Sarah, Iris said softly. She reached for the cup. No, Kieran interjected. He took the cup instead. I will drink to that. To the queen. Iris smiled at him. Kieran, you don't have to. Kieran raised the goblet and took a long draught of the sweet wine. He set the cup down, smiling at Iris. It's good. Berry and... His smile faltered. His skin turned an ashen grey. Kieran grasped his throat. He coughed, and blood splattered onto the white tablecloth. "Kieran!" Iris screamed, grabbing his shoulders. The king convulsed, falling from his chair onto the stone floor. Foam gathered at his mouth. "He's been poisoned!" Vance shouted. "Seal the doors!" Sarah, the servant girl, began to weep hysterically. "They made me. They said they would kill my mate. Beatrice said it was just a sleeping draught." Iris fell to her knees beside Kieran. His pulse was thready. His veins were turning black, the darkness spreading from his throat down to his heart. "Wolfsbane," Iris whispered, smelling the acrid scent on his breath. "But not just wolfsbane. This is mixed with midnight shade. It's incurable." The doors to the great hall burst open, but it wasn't the guards. It was Gavin, and behind him walked a dozen rogues, massive scarred wolves who had clearly been paid in gold and blood. Gavin looked dishevelled, but triumphant. He held a remote detonator in his hand. "Nobody move!" Gavin screamed. "The pack house is rigged with C4 explosives. One step, and we all go to hell together." The room froze. Gavin walked casually toward the head table, stepping over the convulsing body of the king. He looked down at Iris. "You thought you won," Gavin sneered. "You thought a little magic light show would save you? Power isn't about blood, Iris. It's about who has the will to do what is necessary." He kicked Kieran in the ribs. The king groaned, paralyzed. "He's dying," Gavin said gleefully. "The midnight shade paralyzes the wolf, preventing healing. The wolfsbane burns the human organs, a slow, agonizing death. And the best part," Gavin turned to the terrified crowd. "The king is dead," Gavin announced. "Poisoned by the albino witch. She tricked him, she married him, and now she has killed him to take his throne." "Liar!" Iris screamed, standing up. Her hands were covered in Kieran's blood. "Who are they going to believe?" Gavin whispered, leaning in close to her. "The strong alpha they have known for years? Or the freak who appeared out of nowhere with dark magic?" Beatrice stepped out from behind the rogues. She looked manic. "Arrest her!" she commanded the confused pack warriors. "Arrest the Kingslayer!" The warriors hesitated. They looked at the dying king, then at Iris, then at the explosives in Gavin's hand. Fear won out. "Take her," Vance said, his voice breaking. He looked at Iris with apology in his eyes. He couldn't risk the explosives going off with his family in the room. Two guards grabbed Iris by the arms. "No, let me save him. I can save him." Iris fought, kicking and screaming. She looked at Kieran. His golden eyes were dimming, fixed on hers. "Run," Kieran mouthed. "I won't leave you," Iris sobbed. "Take her to the Iron Tower," Gavin commanded. "Chain her in silver. Tomorrow, at dawn, we won't have a third trial. We will have an execution. We will burn the witch, and the king will be mourned as a hero." They dragged Iris away. She watched Gavin sit in the king's chair, putting his feet up on the table, while Beatrice poured herself a glass of wine from the same bottle that had poisoned Kieran. As the heavy iron doors of the tower cell slammed shut, plunging Iris into darkness once again, she didn't curl up and cry. She sat in the corner, feeling the bond with Kieran fading to a thin, fragile thread. He was alive, but barely. "You want a monster, Gavin?" Iris whispered into the dark, her eyes glowing red in the shadows. "I'll show you a monster." Deep inside her, the white wolf howled, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. The shackles on her wrists began to heat up. The Iron Tower was designed to hold alphas, who had lost their minds to bloodlust. The walls were reinforced with spell-hardened concrete, and the bars were solid silver, burning the skin of any werewolf who touched them. Iris sat in the center of the cell, the silver cuffs around her wrists sizzling against her pale skin. The pain was constant, a white-hot branding that would have made a grown warrior weep. But Iris didn't weep. She focused on the pain, using it as a tether to her wolf. Gavin had made a fatal error. He assumed Iris was a normal wolf, just with a fancy coat color. He didn't understand what a primal was. Normal wolves were weakened by silver because it severed their connection to the moon. But primals were the moon. Iris closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She visualized the moon above the clouds. She pulled on that connection, dragging the lunar energy down through the stone roof, through her own body, and into her wrists. "Burn," she commanded, but not her skin, the cuffs. Her veins began to glow with a blinding white light. The air in the cell grew freezing cold, frost creeping up the walls. The silver cuffs didn't melt, they shattered. The metal turned brittle under the intense pressure of her aura and exploded into dust. Iris stood up, rubbing her healed wrists. She walked to the heavy iron door. She didn't bother picking the lock. She placed her palm against the metal and pushed with a pulse of kinetic energy. The hinges screamed, warped, and finally snapped. The door fell forward with a deafening crash. She was out. But she wasn't leaving, not without Kieran. The pack house was quiet. Most of the guards were outside, preparing the pyre for tomorrow's execution. Gavin was likely drunk on victory in the Alpha Suite. Iris moved like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the stone floors. She tracked Kieran's scent, cedarwood and ozone, now tainted by the metallic tang of wolfsbane. She found him in the infirmary, not in a bed, but dumped on the floor in a storage closet. Gavin hadn't even granted him the dignity of a pillow. Kieran was grey, his breathing shallow and rattling. The poison had paralyzed his motor functions. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the mop bucket next to him, filled with despair. When Iris knelt beside him, his eyes flickered. A tear leaked out. He tried to mind-link her. "Run! Trap!" "Shh," Iris whispered, stroking his cold cheek. "I'm not running." She examined him. The black veins had reached his neck. His heart was barely beating. Medicine couldn't save him. The antidote for midnight shade didn't exist in modern alchemy. "You said I was a throwback," Iris whispered to him, her voice trembling. "That my blood is the original blood, the pure blood." She brought her wrist to her mouth and bit down, hard. Crimson blood welled up, but it shimmered with a pearlescent sheen. "Drink," she commanded, pressing her wrist to Kieran's lips. Kieran couldn't move his jaw. Iris used her fingers to pry his mouth open, letting the blood drip onto his tongue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Kieran convulsed. A gasp ripped through his chest. The effect was violent. Where the blood touched, the black veins retracted like recoiling snakes. The grey pallor of his skin flushed with color. Steam began to rise from his body as his alpha healing kicked into overdrive, fueled by the supercharged potency of the primal blood. Kieran arched his back, a low growl building in his throat. He grabbed Iris's wrist, drinking greedily now, his wolf recognizing the salvation. After a minute, he released her. He fell back, panting, sweat soaking his shirt. He blinked. His eyes were no longer dim. They were burning gold. "Iris," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel being crushed. He sat up, flexing his hands. "The pain, it's gone." "We don't have much time," Iris said, wrapping a bandage around her wrist. "Dawn is in 2 hours. Gavin thinks you're dead and I'm helpless." Kieran stood up. He towered over her in the small closet. The rage radiating off him was palpable, but when he looked at her, it softened into awe. "You saved me. You broke out of the Iron Tower and saved me." "I'm taking my pack back, Kieran," Iris said, her eyes flashing red. "With or without you." Kieran grinned, a feral, terrifying expression. He reached out and wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Oh, definitely with me. But we aren't just going to kill him, Iris. We are going to dismantle him." "The explosives," Iris reminded him. "He has a detonator." "Vance," Kieran said. "My beta." He looked terrified. "He knows the wiring of this house better than anyone. If I can get to him before dawn, we can neutralize the threat." "Go," Iris said. "Find Vance. I'll go back to the cell." Kieran froze. "What?" "No. If I'm not in the cell when they come, they'll search the house. They'll find you. They'll panic and detonate the bombs early," Iris argued, her logic steel trap sharp. "The execution must proceed. I need to be on that pyre. It's the only way to get Gavin out in the open, surrounded by the pack, believing he has won." Kieran hated it. His wolf screamed at the idea of his mate in chains again, but he looked at the steel in her ruby eyes and knew she was right. She wasn't a damsel. She was a queen. "If he lights a single match," Kieran vowed, pulling her close for a searing, desperate kiss, "I will flay him alive." "Just be ready," Iris whispered against his lips. "When I howl, bring the rain." The sun rose over the Silver Moon territory like a blood stain spreading across the sky. The town square was packed again, but the mood was somber. Hundreds of pack members stood in the snow, watching as the wooden pyre was soaked in gasoline. Gavin stood on a raised platform, wearing the Alpha King's ceremonial cloak. It was too big for him, dragging in the mud, a visual representation of his inadequacy. Beatrice stood beside him, draped in jewels she had stolen from Iris's room. "Bring out the witch!" Gavin bellowed. Two guards dragged Iris out of the Iron Tower. She was limp, head hanging low, her white hair obscuring her face. She allowed them to roughly shove her onto the pyre. They chained her to the central stake. "Citizens," Gavin addressed the crowd, "today we cleanse our pack. This creature poisoned your king. She used dark magic to deceive us. With her death, the plague on our land ends." "Did she really do it?" someone in the crowd whispered. "The king is dead," another replied. "Gavin showed us the body." Gavin held up a torch. The flames danced in the morning wind. "Any final words, witch?" Gavin sneered, stepping close to the pyre. "Beg. Beg me for a quick death, and maybe I'll cut your throat before the fire touches you." Iris slowly lifted her head. The crowd gasped. She wasn't crying. She wasn't terrified. She was smiling, and her eyes were glowing with such intensity that they looked like burning coals. "I have a final word," Iris said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the crowd without a microphone. "Speak," Gavin demanded. "Look up," Iris said. Gavin frowned. He looked up at the sky. On the roof of the pack house, overlooking the square, stood a figure. It was Kieran. He wasn't dead. He was standing tall, holding something in his hand. He threw the object down. It landed with a heavy thud at Gavin's feet. It was the remote detonator, broken in half. Beside Kieran, Beta Vance stepped forward, holding a pair of wire cutters, looking grim but relieved. "The bombs are disabled, Gavin," Vance shouted. "Your leverage is gone." Gavin's face went pale. He looked at the detonator, then back at Iris. "Now!" Iris screamed. She didn't shift this time. She didn't need to. She simply exerted her will. The chains binding her to the stake flew open. She kicked the gasoline barrel over, sending fuel splashing onto Gavin and Beatrice, who were standing too close. Iris grabbed the torch from Gavin's hand. "You wanted a fire?" Iris asked coldly. "Have it." She tossed the torch. Gavin shrieked as the fuel ignited. He shifted instantly, the explosion of fur dousing the flames on his skin, but the shockwave threw him backward. Beatrice wasn't so lucky. She screamed, diving into a snowbank to extinguish her burning dress, her vanity ruined forever as the fire scorched her hair and face. Kieran leapt from the roof. He landed in the square with a ground-shaking impact, creating a crater in the concrete. "Traitors!" Kieran roared. "Kill them!" But the pack didn't move to help Gavin. They had seen enough. They saw their king alive. They saw the alpha they feared exposed as a coward. The rogue mercenaries Gavin had hired drew their weapons, realizing they wouldn't get paid if Gavin died. "Leave them to me," Kieran ordered his guards. Kieran charged the mercenaries. It was a massacre. The Alpha King moved like a whirlwind of death, his sword flashing, his claws tearing. Meanwhile, Gavin, in his wolf form, a large, patchy brown wolf, scrambled out of the fire and lunged for Iris. Aldiafor knew if he killed her, he might still break Kieran. Iris stood her ground. As Gavin leaped, jaws open to crush her skull, Iris shifted. The white wolf appeared in a burst of light. She met Gavin mid-air. She was bigger, stronger, faster. She slammed Gavin into the ground, her jaws clamping around his shoulder. He yelped, thrashing, trying to bite her underbelly. But Iris was a primal. Her hide was like armor. She tossed him aside like a rag doll. Gavin rolled, whimpering, trying to crawl away. Iris transformed back into her human form, standing naked and unashamed in the wreckage. She walked over to where Gavin lay, broken and bleeding in the snow. Kieran finished the last mercenary and came to stand beside her. He handed her his cloak. "Do it," Kieran said softly. Gavin shifted back to human form. He was a mess. "Please," he sobbed, blood bubbling from his lips. "Iris, cousin, family. I raised you. I gave you a roof." "You gave me a cellar," Iris corrected, her voice void of emotion. "You gave me scraps. You gave me bruises." "I surrender!" Gavin screamed, looking at the pack. "I demand a trial. You can't kill a surrendered wolf." Iris looked at Kieran. "Is that true?" "Pack law says a surrendered alpha must be judged by the council," Kieran admitted, his jaw tight. "It could take months. He could bribe his way out." Iris looked down at Gavin, who was already starting to smirk, sensing a loophole. "Good thing I'm not just a wolf," Iris said. "I'm the High Queen." She looked at the pack. "Who here wants to see him stand trial?" Silence. "Who here wants justice?" Iris asked. A roar went up from the crowd. Years of Gavin's tyranny, his taxes, his cruelty, it all boiled over. "The pack has spoken," Iris said. She didn't touch him. She turned to the crowd. "He is yours." She stepped back. The mob surged forward. It wasn't the royal execution Gavin had planned for Iris. It was a chaotic, brutal tearing apart by the very people he had oppressed. There was no dignity in it, no final words, just the sound of justice being served by 100 hands. Beatrice, watching from the snowbank, burnt and horrified, tried to sneak away into the forest. "Ah," Kieran said, spotting her. "Vance." Vance stepped forward. "Yes, my king?" "Strip her of her rank," Kieran ordered. "She is no longer a beta. She is an Omega, and she is banished to the rogue lands. If she sets foot in the 5 territories again, she is to be hunted for sport." Beatrice screamed as the guards dragged her away, kicking and crying, destined for a life of starvation and fear in the lawless wilds, the exact fate she had wished upon Iris. The Silver Moon Pack house had been rebuilt. The cellar where Iris had slept was filled in with concrete, and a garden of white roses was planted on top of it. The alliance between the territories had never been stronger. With a primal queen on the throne, no one dared challenge the leadership. Iris sat on the balcony of the royal suite, watching the sun set over the mountains. She looked different now, healthy, strong. Her white hair shone like spun silk. Kieran stepped out onto the balcony, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He placed them on the table and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking about the past?" he asked softly. "No," Iris smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "Thinking about the future." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Kieran went still. His breath hitched. He waited, and then he felt it, a tiny, faint flutter. A second heartbeat. "Iris," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The healer confirmed it today," she said, turning to face him. "A pup. Or, knowing my bloodline, maybe 2. Kieran fell to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach, listening to the sound of his legacy. He looked up at her, tears in his golden eyes. The king who was feared by thousands looked at his wife with absolute surrender. "I will protect you," he vowed. "I will protect both of you. Forever." Iris ran her fingers through his dark hair. "I know, but you won't have to do it alone. The white wolf protects her own." As the stars began to appear, the howl of a wolf echoed from the distant mountains. Not a sound of loneliness, but a song of victory. The Albino Omega was gone. Long live the Queen. And that, my friends, is the epic conclusion of the Albino Omega. From sleeping in a freezing cellar to ruling the entire werewolf kingdom, Iris certainly gave Gavin and Beatrice the hard karma they deserved. I think letting the pack take care of Gavin was the ultimate poetic justice. He was destroyed by the very people he thought he owned. And Beatrice surviving only to be an outcast? Fate worse than death. What did you think of the primal bloodline twist? And that baby announcement at the end? If you want to see a sequel about their children and the new threats they might face, smash that like button. Let's try to hit 10,000 likes on this finale. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have a new drama coming next week involving a billionaire mafia boss and his runaway bride that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.